Ngoma Nigel Chanakira raised very important points, and maybe to relate to the issue of pensioners. Recently, we received a petition from one of the citizens of this country, seeking the parliament to address the issue of pension. And the committee is seized with that petition, and just as we resume sitting, we are going to table a report pertaining to the findings of that petition. So I'm sure as the people of Zimbabwe, you can also follow through that report, where we were actually highlighting some of the very important points you talked of, the loss of value of pensions. And that was the anchor of that report. And that's what the petitioner was beseeching Parliament to address. So I think, like what you rightfully said, that we also need to have people at heart and come up with sustainable ways of managing our resources. And you said you want to give us teeth, Mkoma Nigel, and I'm very glad that that's why I posed section 129K, that if you give us teeth, we can bite. And it is very important that, and also to share with this House, that with the advent of the new dispensation, things have been done differently vis-a-vis the old dispensation, where you witnessed in the old dispensation the uncertainty whether you were an MP, a minister. But now, the way we do business is different. And even if you look in the issue of our committees, we are quite seized with very important issues that we need to address. And we are tackling those issues without fear or favor. So at the end of the day, I'm calling this House to partner various committees so that you bring out these issues. And I'm sure His Excellency, the President of Zimbabwe, Comrade Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa, is very clear about the issue of corruption. So there is no way, even as a parliamentarian, if you raise issue to do with corruption, you'll be gagged or you'll be whipped. So there are certain issues that we also need to do and to factor in as Zimbabweans, that we have a new dispensation that is listening, and others might be having a different view, but for some of us, we are seeing that we are doing our committee work as it is supposed to be conducted. So at the end of the day, I'm actually calling people who are gathered here to partner our committees and become friends of committees, where we can share issues that you think must be in the public domain, and so that we address the issues that are bedeviling our beautiful country. So it is my humble plea that, yes, we've got issues. The issue of debt, there is no one who can say, why should we interrogate the issues to do with debt, or why is it that we can continue in such unfavorable conditions that we have witnessed before. So in short, Mkoma Nigel, this is my humble plea to you, that I'm the chairperson of the Budget, Finance and Economic Development, and I know that you're a renowned banker. If you think there are issues that you want us to bring to the attention of the executive, we are speaking on behalf of the committee. We'll be very glad to give you that platform so that we take the executive to account for some of these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Mona. There are colleagues who joined us after introductions. So unfortunately, you won't get to know the other people, but we'll all get to know you. So may I ask that Dr. Nigel Chanakira, you introduce yourself. I know we all know you, but just this formal introduction, we give the mic to others who have not yet done so. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm Nigel Chanakira. I am a researcher, an economist, a businessman, and a lay pastor. Thank you.
Thank you. Eddie? Oh, you did. You introduced yourself. Who else didn't introduce themselves? I know, Judith, you didn't.
Good morning. My name is Judith Kaulem. I'm with the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust.
Oh, okay. Great.
Good morning. I'm Dorcas Chishumba and I'm with the Catholic Agency for Overseas Development.
Thank you. Behind you is a comrade who has not introduced themselves.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Olin Chapisa. I work for the Frederick Ebert Stiftung. Thanks.
And it keeps going.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Samantha. I'm with the Norwegian People's Aid. Masimba.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Masimba Kuchera, board member with the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development.
Thank you. Who else?
Morning, my name is Tinashika Duo. I'm an economist at Equity Access.
Good morning, my name is Tipros Mchena. I'm going to speak in the afternoon.
Good morning. My name is Darlington Matsonga. I'm a social and economic justice ambassador with the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development with an interest in debt justice and debt audit.
Morning, my name is Nancy Kachingwe. I'm a freelance activist.
You did. Oh, let's keep coming. Okay.
Morning. My name is Williams Madzimure. I'm with the Parliament of Zimbabwe representing Kambuzuma and also a member of Public Accounts Committee and the Budget and Finance.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So colleagues, there are a few we have technical issues I want to share with you. So if you look at your program, we were supposed to break for lunch at 12:30, but because we had our tea 30 minutes later, we see no reason for us breaking at 12:30 for lunch. So we'll do 1 o'clock, but it's also to cover for the time that has been lost. So that's the technical issue number one. The second one is about the panel. As I call upon the colleagues who are supposed to come and sit on the brown chairs, there are a few changes here, or 1 or 2 changes. This is a civil society perspective session, so we have agreed to swap Nancy's input, Nancy Kachingwe's input on gender dynamics of debt and development with Judith Kaulem's input. Judith is with the Poverty Reduction Forum Trust as the executive director. Just to say to you, now we are going a little bit deeper into the nexus between debt and many facets of development and human life, debt and human rights, debt and gender, debt and extractives, many of these issues, so that we bring it closer to home. I would also appeal to colleagues to say, let's also keep it simple, because this issue is often lost in semantics. So if you speak aeroplane language to people that are walking, you will be completely lost. So we must keep it at that level. Let's simplify things. Let's begin to get down there. Okay. Last introduction from Hugo. And as Hugo introduces himself, may I kindly ask the panelists to please step forward and sit on the brown chairs. Those are brown, isn't it? Yeah, they look brown. Good.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Hugo Knoppert. In Zimbabwe, I go by the name of Hugo because it's difficult to pronounce my first name. I'm the coordinator of the Zimbabwe Europe Network, which is a coalition of European NGOs working on Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. So the panelists are Judith Kaulem, Poverty Reduction Forum Trust, who is stepping forward. None other than Brian Kagoro, who is here written as Executive Director of High Africa Group, but Brian is also a renowned lawyer and has done so many things in the Zimbabwean civil society space and other spaces beyond Zimbabwe. And none other than Titus Kwemende, who is with Oxfam International, and he's working on extractive industries governance. Based, the last time I checked, you were based in Mozambique, isn't it? In Maputo, and I'm sure you're still based there. So thank you so much to the panel of three. In terms of how we are going to proceed, we would want to give as much time as possible to interactions with participants. So let's make our points in 10 minutes, because you still have time to respond. So 10 minutes per panelist. That means 30 minutes of listening to the panelists, and then we allow participants to also contribute, and we allow you to respond to questions. I think that's fair. So we keep on having technical issues. We are going to swap laptops at some point. So in terms of the way we will proceed, we'll start with Titus, and then we'll go to Brian and Judith. I guess that is okay. So let's allow Titus to step forward through a round of applause.
Thank you, Kulejoy. I mean, my appreciation to colleagues from Zimcode, Chairman Msvanda, Director Janet Joe, and my brother John, who conducted me. My name is Titus. I'm based in Maputo. I coordinate Oxfam extractors work in the region. I will breeze through the presentation. I will give it to the organizers so that they give you. I mean, some things are just what they are. I mean, if we are credible, we have to use certain terms. So they may be technical, so you will get it. So if you miss certain things, don't worry. So just so you have a sense of where we work, we basically work in all the key countries that are resource-rich countries of the world. So what I'm talking about really is not so much Zimbabwe, but reality as it is in different African countries. Because sometimes we think there's something unique about Zim, but many things aren't unique. So I will push through Africa to make my point. I will basically make the argument that extractives have been part of the reason why we are in debt, and they could maybe, if we are careful, help address some of the issues. People here love to talk about leveraging natural resources. I will sort of engage with that discourse a little bit. I will start quickly. There is a recent term that we're using in resource literature called the pre-source curse. Many are familiar with the resource curse, which is what happens when you have many dollars coming from extractors. You know, you squander it and you're poor. I think we've done quite a bit of that. But I want to introduce to people, because this is fairly recent thinking, a concept called the pre-source curse. A pre-source curse is the growth disappointment that happens in a country as a result of discovery of extractives. So this is actions that happen before you start having money. So when you announce that you may have oil, what happens between now when you announce and the time you start making money? When you announce that you have diamonds in Chiazo, what then happens between that announcement and the actual production? What we are engaging with literature is what is called the pre-source case, where you generate massive amounts of excitement. I was reading the Herald the other day when talking about Zaraban. You would think that we're getting $1 billion from Zarabani maybe next year or a few months from now. And that's actually not new, it is common. That often the announcement creates excitement, it creates expectation. And it drives often bureaucrats into unsustainable levels of borrowing. Because you think you're going to be rich, so you can start borrowing. So what you notice in most countries is the announcement causes them to be heavily indebted. So this is not just Zimbabwe, which may get into this. You will see with a few examples that I'll give how dangerous it is. So the discovery leads you into unsustainable borrowing and all kinds of behavior that I'll engage on. So that is what it is. Paul Collier is engaged on this. Some of you are familiar with that. I'll give Ghana, for example. The President Kufuor in Ghana announced sometime in 2007, after announcing that we have discovered oil, he says we're going to fly. You know, this is Ghana. He says we're going to fly with Ghanaian oil. But of course, Ghana didn't fly, not at all. In fact, they didn't grow. Between 2014 and 2016, growth which had been projected to be 7% went under 3% after the announcement. And what happened is, after the announcement, Ghana started heavily borrowing, profligate spending. Some of you just need to look at the size of Ghanaian cabinet and exposure when the price markets crashed. Ghana saved about 484 million from the oil revenues, but borrowed in the period $4.5 billion. So it increased your appetite to start borrowing ridiculously. Mozambique, which is where I'm based, I went to Mozambique in 2014, and in 2014, we were talking about discovering gas in northern Mozambique. The bureaucrats went into borrowing overboard. Some of you know of the $2 billion. When we were looking for the $2 billion, we said we are going to start generating gas revenue in 2020 to 2021. And debtors, of course, were imprudent, and they gave Mozambique that money. And as we speak, Mozambique and Ghana are negotiating IMF deals. So the discovery drives you literally into the arms of IMF. The tonal voracity effect. Voracity effect is actually a term that we use in economic literature. That discovery of resources leads to voracious appetites by politicians. They loot in the order of Mobutu. And if you look at what is happening, and it is called voracious appetites for wealth accumulation are stimulated by temporary resource falls. It's called the voracity effect. Nothing new that we're seeing. It happens in many places. And so we have to be very careful. And the reason why you have voracity effect is when you discover oil, diamonds, or whatever, before your institutions are strong, you are going to be worse off than you were before you discovered them. The human cost of extractivism, I don't want to get into this. I mean, we literally are named after a mining magnate called Rhodes. You remember that? Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe. We were literally named after a mining magnate. So the very essence of Zimbabwe, Zambia, we were created or designed to be extracted. And so you look at the way we distributed certain roads. They were facilitating moving resources from the mine to the highway to the ocean, right? And so what we're doing is resurfacing and not rethinking our infrastructure in the country. So we've seen all this, Marikana. I won't talk about the human rights catastrophe, climate change. I mean, we are engaged. I mean, we are currently going through one of the most vicious episodes of cyclones recently. But I want us to go beyond disaster preparedness, around when people were told who is giving blankets, to say what are we witnessing here, comrades, with cyclones. What we are witnessing is global warming. What we are witnessing is climate change. And what we know is climate change is driven by massive carbon emissions. And what we also know that carbon emissions are usually what happens through extractive companies. Look at the biggest emitters in the world right now. They are mining oil and gas companies. So in a way you could say what is happening with extreme weather conditions has got to do with practices of the extractive sector. And so what we are seeing right now when we're in trouble, people are giving us blankets, syringes, and I'm seeing helicopters moving. And I want to thank people doing that. But I would rather have companies and countries address carbon emissions than give me blankets. I hope this makes sense. So when you give us blankets that are heavily branded, the thinking that we have is people are very nice to us. People are very alive. And yet the real issue why we are in this mess is partly because of actions of companies that are giving us blankets. So when we engage in extractives, I want us to engage internationally around the practices and operations of certain companies in certain countries, Paris Agreement and stuff like that. These are things that maybe I think I will be engaged by following presenters. Natural resources have a two-way relationship I've already talked about. So our challenge is policy decisions that are needed to transform discoveries. I mean, turning oil or turning diamonds into houses, into roads, into hospitals. I guess that's what we're trying to do, and there are 4 channels of doing that. Some of that through government spending, and some of it through what we call industry activities. That's when you come up with a deliberate process that allows the industry to be networked with the wider economy, and then you create, it could be jobs or it could be other things that we'll talk about, infrastructure and stuff like that. Give you a picture. This is developed by African Development Bank, which talks about the 4 channels in which you could use to use. So you can see public spending that the government should, as of necessity, invest heavily, particularly with extractive resources, in health, education, etc., etc. And of course, you also want to create, some people call it local content, where you come up with industry activities. You design your sector in such a way that you leverage on the presence of companies to address issues of infrastructure, to address issues of linkages, so that you don't just produce cobalt. Maybe one day you produce batteries, so that you don't just produce phosphate. Maybe you produce fertilizer, which is what you need to improve or to increase productivity of agriculture. And so these are the 4 channels that you could use, which will end with what we call human development. And I'll unpack that a little bit. The key thing around leveraging extractives or leverage natural resources will really have to do with making sure that we do the best given the priorities, possibilities, and projections. So industry activities such as employment, procurement, infrastructure offer additional opportunities that government can leverage to fast-track your national development. And so you don't want to have a company that comes up with a dam that people who are in the surrounding areas cannot have access to. So you want to come up with addresses or situations where there's third-pass access to railways. In Malawi, I think you have a railway line where ordinary people cannot use. It's just used for transporting coal. So you do want third-party access so that when you're transporting coal, you could also use the same railway line to transport agricultural produce or passengers. These are the linkages that we need to explore. So you have to understand the characteristics of natural resource revenue, that they are fleeting. And you don't usually determine a lot of the things that drive the profitability of it, which is the commodity price. Coal picked up at $300 a ton, and it went down to under $90. So you might have it. But the fact that you have it doesn't mean you're going to have the kind of money that you want. So we have to understand this and make sure that when we have money, let's use it prudently and let's invest it in infrastructure, health, and education and things like that. People who use money from diamonds on elections usually don't do well. And that happens in many countries that I won't mention. But the key issue, and I keep hearing this, we want to leverage extractives, is to manage our expectations. Let's have realistic expectations on timing and magnitude of what we are going to from an activity. I do have a sense that sometimes we overstate the value and abilities of our extractives to dig us out of a very complicated crisis. I'll give you projections of Ghana, Libya, Mozambique, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Uganda. Projections of all these countries proved that even though they thought they were going to be rich, it's actually coming short of that. So there is a pattern there, that unless you have strong institutions, usually you're going to be disappointed. What you think you will have is not what you're going to get. So governments is important, members of parliament, business, we have to ensure that we address issues of expectations. We have to manage our rhetoric ourselves. I think before elections, it gets really crazy. Don't worry, in Bikita, we have lithium, don't worry. And people have this feeling that in a year, they're going to be road, hospital, and stuff. Now, when you don't do that, there's so much pressure for you to end up borrowing. Kazakhstan, they have oil, they're celebrating oil in a place called Kashagan. It took 13 years for them to work on the oil deal. Ernst & Young projected that 73% of mining oil and gas projects actually never happen on time. So you're talking about Muzarabani today. I mean, we really have to relax, comrades. Nothing is coming there anytime soon, based on what we are and based on where we are. The time it takes to discover, produce, and at least in the mining sector, is actually slower in countries with weaker institutions. So when you look at the state of your governance, forget about your resources. We have to sort out a lot of things. So I get worried when you start talking about mortgaging our diamonds, mortgaging our oil. Like we are way off in terms of where we should be. I'll give you an example. This is typically what happens with the mining project. The time of exploration is usually 1 to 10 years. Site design, construction, operation could take 2 to 100 years. And so from the time you announce that we have discovered to the time you start earning corporate income tax, it takes multiple years. So it is important how you manage, it is important how you budget, it is important how you communicate. Why is it important? Because when we forecast projection revenue, Zimra, this is where you come in, you guys are experts, this is critical. The importance of forecasting is everything in our sector. Whether forecasts are too optimistic or pessimistic, it actually matters, because governments make decisions on the basis of forecasts. Second, obviously, civil society, voting, and media, we have to be careful how we manage and how we announce. Third, forecasts affect assessments of lenders. If lenders think Zimbabwe is going to be rich with oil, or they're going to throw money at you like crazy, it affects rating agencies and how Zimbabwe is considered risky or a good buy or stuff like that. So therefore, the cost of borrowing. Sometimes you can't borrow because of how people perceive that money is going to come in your sector. If borrowing costs are artificially low, they are going to fuel over borrowing, like what you see in Mozambique. Everyone believed that Mozambique is going to get rich. In 2014, Christine Lagarde, the president or the managing director of IMF, said Mozambique is going to be the Qatar of Africa. As we speak, they are negotiating a debt deal with Mozambique. 5 years from now. Of course, then Mozambique went on crazy. The $2 billion, when they were talking to creditors, it was like, listen, you know we have gas. This is what we are putting on the table. They are not going to have the gas until around 2035. That's the research that we have done. It's way off beyond that. So estimates suggest that country borrowing scores institutional investors affected by growth focus. Scores improve when focus rise, even after accounting for a country's growth. This is our challenge in civil society as we talk about growth. Robust economic modeling. Each time I hear of Muzarabani, I hear about lithium, I hear about platinum, I want to see the agreement. And I want us to do proper economic modeling. Let's come up with assumptions. How are you going to get the money and when are we going to get it? We are not yet in this. We are talking about looting. This is looting on a grand scale. We want to know. It is all fine. But let's get deeper into the weeds of how much is this deal going to cost us. So we're talking about economic modeling. But you can't model any loan agreement. You can't model any mining agreement if you have no access to the agreement. So for me, as it is of necessity, Honorable Mona, we want to see loan agreements. We want to see transparency and all the mining, oil and gas agreements. As a matter of, just as a start, we can't be talking about modeling and all this stuff unless we have sight of that. And the more it is hard for us to have sight of these documents, the more worried I am about whether we're going to get them. Over 36 countries are publicly disclosing contracts. This shouldn't be a difficult thing. So as civil society, let's do this. We are doing this in Mozambique. We are modeling every oil block and looking at how much the government is going to get. And we're actually projecting over a 40-year period. Because investors do that. But when they do that, they also become very optimistic so that they convince investors. You want a civil society perspective on every deal. And I mean every deal at a project level. Competent and informed activism. I mean, sometimes our rhetoric just doesn't match with where we are. In terms of when we're going to get things and when we want. So we really want competent activism on that. Typically in a civil society organization, if someone says they have a Bachelor of Accounting degree, what do you think? You think they are the finance officer, right? Which is almost true 90% of the time. I want us to get to a point where the accountant or the chartered accountant is a program officer working on an extractors project. I think the skilling issue in civil society, we really have to address that. It is the program officer who are historians, political science, lawyers, and someone with a master's in gender. These are the guys who are doing economic modeling and all this. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think you can be skilled, and there are people who are polymaths. They are good in multiple areas. But I do think in terms of our skilling, we want to see mining engineers being program officers, chartered accountants, actuaries. And one of them can be paid well. When it does that, I think when you go to Zimra and when you go to a government official with this kind of information, this is going to help. So we want competent and informed activism. Informed legislators. I mean, look at the quality of discussions during the data assumption, the RBZ data assumption bill. Look at the Hansard, who said what and what was said. I mean, some of it is really concerning. We really want informed legislators, political players, will and incentive. Knowledge without the interest, the incentives to do that, I think it won't go to get us anywhere. We should also pay attention to behavior. I'm not going to look at the laws. I will actually want to look at government behavior, rhetoric, how they move. Sons of politicians, wives, brothers, uncles. I want to see the movement of players in the sector. That is what will tell you whether the country is going off a cliff. Never worry about what people talk about this act, and it's fine, and we need to improve the law. But watch the behavior soon after discovery and announcement. You will get a lot of feeders. Manage citizen expectation. This is a critical aspect for us as civil society, of course. Paul Collier talks about it in studying Ghana. He says, factors that drive resource scarce, it could be 500 million barrel oil discovery. I mean, when you hear people talk about Chiadzwa, the reality of what you can get from Chiadzwa and what is true, it affects. And Paul Collier actually says there's something called psychological issue. There are psychological implications to discovering critical resources. You literally think you are rich. It affects the way you walk, the way you negotiate when you're in IMF. It affects everything. And the man who has discovered the resources is a terrible negotiator, most of it. So there is a psychology of discovery that we have to engage in. And civil society have to help us in that regard. Make sure that we are grounded. Lithium is not money. There is a lot that has to be done from the lithium discovery to the actual money. Let me talk a little bit on robust public financial management, because in response to this, I think all I'm trying to say is it's not the discovery, it's how you manage robust public financial management. Countries expecting new resource production could face pressure, to borrow ahead of time, which is what Mozambique did. They said we're going to have gas, so we are promising you that we're going to pay you with the gas starting from 2021. So they are getting all kinds of loans. And I've told you that even IMF have discovered that it's not 2021. It's likely 2035. So the creditors now have to accept the fact that it will take at least 15 years for them to get the first payment. And so then the question is it then wise for you to borrow with the Muzarabani or with all kinds of places, especially in the context of weak institutions? Not the right intent. I'm not questioning people's intent here. The institutions, the laws, the environment, the pricing. Is it then right? Is it the benefits of such a process, needs to be carefully and cautiously assessed against the future burden of debt. So I'm not trying to say no, but I'm saying be very, very, very careful, complex, when we're talking about it. The sustainability of new debt will depend on the cost of borrowing, the country's existing debt service burden, and the organizational capability, spending more in production. I'll give you an example of Zambia. So Zambia borrowed about 750 million over 10 years. And they were basing this on the expectation that copper production would continue to drive economic growth. This is Zambia. Give us 750 million, copper will take care of it. 40%, look at what happened. They actually were borrowing 1 billion, as in 2014. Copper went down by over 30%. The increase in annual interest cost was actually equal to the annual cost of implementing sector-wide reform in education. Countries do not control the price of commodities. We just don't. So be very careful when you start talking about we're going to pay with gold, we're going to pay. You don't control the key variables here. It's not impossible. It's not entirely bad, but it's often not dependent on you. Borrowing continued. Ultimately, borrowing can only make sense if it will generate enough economic returns for at least over the future interest payments. However, past experience show immense political pressure to borrow, which is where our civil society and media need to be responsible. Sometimes the way we put pressure on a cornered government can really drive that government to be imprudent. Secretly sign a deal just to create some political space in the short term, which is why instead of so much pressure around do this, make a deal, let's respond with critical economic modeling. This is what is going to happen. This is where you're going to money. This is not where you're going to make money. This is actually what makes sense. So that when people say you're going to make money, we say you can't make money until 2025. Then saving and spending is a critical discussion. How much do you save? How much do you don't? I put it to you that even if you get a good mining deal which gives you massive money, we wake up tomorrow, we have lots of lithium, and lithium is flowing like crazy. Lithium forex. I mean, it will come in and it's fine. The challenge sometimes in exposing or in putting too much money at the same time is where you end up getting what is called the Dutch disease. The Dutch disease is where the extractive sector itself is doing so well, but it crowds out all the other non-extractive sectors. This is what happened in the 1970s in the Netherlands, when the discovery of oil and of gas led to a decline in manufacturing because of the lack of competitiveness of the other sectors. So we really have to be careful how much, even if we get the money, how much we spend. How often we do, the rate at which we spend, even when we get a windfall. It is important to do that. Spending too much too quickly can drive out prices, lead to inflation, and risk Dutch disease. And it's very difficult to tell a bureaucrat with 1 billion that maybe you have to spend 1 million here, tomorrow maybe to be staggered and deliberate. You are so excited, you're going out of power in 2 years. The challenge is you want to do it all at one time. So let's be careful so that we are also guarding against the Dutch disease, which is what you may give even if you are making money. The next question, obviously, is the question of saving. We now have a sovereign wealth fund to address issues of saving. If you want to save, usually it's through increasing your reserves with the central bank, or you could have a sovereign wealth fund. In principle, it is fine to have a sovereign wealth fund. But here is the problem. Yeah. If the expected revenues are large enough to justify saving for a long term, the advantage of a sovereign wealth fund are quite clear. Dividends from investment can potentially be generated permanent income streams for government and therefore future generations. But the money isn't much, it can be a problem. Because the establishment of the sovereign wealth fund is also expensive. It attracts significant fixed deposits. And so it can actually be problematic if your sector doesn't generate the kind of money that is useful. So you then have to look at whether you want to save through a sovereign wealth fund or through other instruments. But since we're already there and we are actually there, the question for us is how we are going to use it, invest it, and make sure it works. Ring financing, finances, institution, leverage private sector investments at project level. This is where you start talking about beyond the revenues, because you also don't want to get to a point where you look at extractives through revenue lenses. No, look at it through linkages and what you could do through the productive sectors. Now look at that. Typically, you will get in taxes about 15 to 20%. That is the degree. When we're talking about all the money we want from extractives, the tax is about 15 to 20%. But the vast money is through the blue, which is your operating expenditures, capital expenditures and stuff. That's where you have to tap some of the money. The problem with most of our governments is we are talking so much about the royalty tax and corporate income tax, which is fine, but it constitutes a small percentage. The real deal is going to be capital expenditures, cost audits, going to procure the stuff and how much they are going to procure the stuff. That's where a government needs to tap. And so unless you create and you increase your productive capacity, your ability to absorb this kind of percentage, you are not going to get much. So Mozambique is Sasol, which is one of the biggest petrochemical companies in the world, in Mozambique right now, in Pandetemane. But they're only getting 10 million in taxes every year. Including water and uniforms, they're actually being imported from South Africa, some of it. You have to demonstrate that you can actually create and produce and supply some of these things. If you cannot, all you can get is a bit of tax. And we all know that even with the 15 to 20%, the vast majority of that money is being lost through IFFs. Agency of diversification, which is what I'm talking about. We really have to start thinking about, before you discover oil, talk about when you're going to be weaned from fossil fuels. The reason why we have to do that is some of these minerals companies are going to be obsolete. They are not really dependent on us. With the fourth industrial revolution happening, we are seeing a surge of demand of a different type of instruments, which is your neodymium, which is your chromium, which is your lithium, which is your cobalt. And we are going to see a gradual decline in coal demand because of fossil fuels and climate change. And so you want to make sure that you start working out of this. At least for countries that have got minerals that are relevant to the greener future or for the industrial revolution, they could have a future. But let's start understanding that the question around diversification is important even before you start having money. Let's look at Nigeria. Nigeria went down because they were dependent completely on oil. Versus Indonesia, I don't have time now. Versus Indonesia. Indonesia got a bit of money but invested it in infrastructure, rural infrastructure, in agriculture and stuff like that. And then Indonesia did much better than Nigeria, a comparative country. Nigeria took until 2008 to get to where Indonesia was in 1980. Concluding remarks. Can you give me 1 minute? Democratization of opening up of natural resource governance in Zimbabwe. I think we really have to start talking about Parliament taking a much stronger oversight role over extractives. We want to see the deals for Kare, all these resources. We're hearing all these new nice deals that are being signed, supposedly. We want to see the detail. I mean, we want to see the loan agreements. We want to see what the contract says. We want to see the cost audits. We want to see all these documents. There's nothing unusual about that. Competent research analysis by NGOs, regional and global influencing around norm setting, climate change, debt management. Like I was saying, I'm happy when a country donates blankets, but I'm much happier if that country deals with carbon emissions. Which means issues that are happening in Chimanimani are connected to what is happening in a Chinese factory in Guangzhou. And so we have to appreciate the global interconnectedness of phenomena as we experience it locally. And so regional and global influencing around norm setting, climate change, debt management, EI governance is going to be critical. Cross-country learnings, a lot of stuff that we're going through in Zimbabwe. Sit down with Mozambicans, they'll laugh at you. Oh, you have not seen anything yet. You're talking about Zarabani. We've been talking about Rovuma since 2009. So let's encourage this cross-country learning. Moses Naim, this is how I close. He says power is not what it used to be. Power as a science or power as a discipline. Let's leverage the disruptive power or influence of micro-powers. The reason why I'm saying is sometimes as ZimQuad, we may think we are too small to affect the way IMF or World Bank operates. But I want to tell you the way things are right now is what we are micro-powers. And we have to start leveraging the disruptive influence and potential of us micropowers, the little NGOs, a little NGO here, a little think tank there. There is enough ability and potential for us to actually influence how IMF, World Bank, and big governments work. Thank you very much.
No, Titus, you don't have to drop the mic. Thank you so much, Titus. Great. Our next input will be from Judith O'Brien, whoever is ready. It doesn't have to be, yeah, you can agree. Great.
Thank you. They are still trying to link me up, but let me start off with something we all know, that responsibility is a necessary concomitant of power. And if we accept that responsibility is a necessary concomitant of power, we must also accept that the debt crisis is about ceded, abused, or misused power. If we accept that the debt crisis is about ceded, abused, or misused power, we must also accept that leadership, political and economic, is about stewardship and not just ownership. I'm trying to control this. I'm not sure if I'm a little gadget we're supposed to put in there. It's let me try it again. Okay, if it doesn't work, I think he will help me. So therefore, the quality of stewardship is a measure of the quality of leadership. Whether you are in ZANU, in MDC, or anywhere else. When there is poor stewardship over resources, there cannot be great leadership, irrespective and notwithstanding what you say. Number 3. It is common cause that the earth is not going to continue producing more land, greater harvest, unless there is faithful stewardship. Right? And also, no one can say they love Zimbabwe, they fought for Zimbabwe, they died for Zimbabwe, this land, and then take steps to destroy Zimbabwe and Zimbabwe's future, or the future for Zimbabwe. I want to remind us that the conversation about debt has a history, and that history is a history we are grateful to the faith-based institutions led by the Catholics and the Zimbabwe Council of Churches about the care economy. And the essence of the care economy was that it was not about primitive accumulation. It was about economic inclusion of the widest spectrum of the citizenry. So power, if you think about it, is linked to the structure of the state, the structure of the economy, to society, to rights and responsibilities of actors in society, to the innovativeness of society. I wish to remind you of something that I've consistently said, that the challenge with Zimbabwe is that this country is run perfectly on memory and very little on imagination. Therefore, that the overinvestment we've made in technocracy, in training technocrats, is harvested by others, our neighbors in South Africa and Botswana, and as far wide as Canada, the United Kingdom and the United States. Partly because having invested in technocrats, we have absolutely no use for them. Because our medium of governing is based on historicizing everything and being hysterical about everything. And I note that even within so-called oppositional and civic spaces, we've become slaves of history. History is meant to be the fuel that spurs us into the future. Everybody else is going to the race for space, the race for the blue economy, and we are still fighting over little common things. Zimbabwe's flagrant, almost exuberant weakness is the inability to coordinate its brilliance. Ours is not a problem of mediocrity. Yes, we have many mediocre people, in many private and public institutions. But ours is of excessive brilliance that's unwilling to subordinate itself to a national common good. So I wish to suggest to you that the debt crisis, we must talk about it purely because of this. It is essentially about loss of sovereignty. It is about loss of policy space. It is about loss of any potential dividend from the development process. But the debt crisis is also about holistic citizenship, constitutionalism, justice, and rule of law. Other folk will talk about this. I want to remind us of our demographic structure. If you go back a little to that phrase, it says, a cynical person says that, you can't tell. Why am I putting a demographic structure page on it? I wish to suggest to you this, that the policy determinants and the benefits of the borrowing done is accruing to 4% of the population who are above the age of 64. And Eddie, this is not targeted at you. That the age, above the age of 64, this is not an ageist statement. The control of policy, the control of power and the structures is for that minority. The next 24% of the population has little input. But the bulk of the population, which is 17%, between the ages of 0 to 34, has absolutely no input in what's going on. We have conversation about debt, we have conversation about big deals, we have conversation about leveraging natural resources done by people who are in the departure lounge of life. Those who are in the pre-boarding, whatever lounge, are not part of the conversation. So I wish to, comrade sister, I wish to celebrate you and Zimcourt for getting us across the political spectrum to realize that our future does not carry a political party card. Our future at the current rate, which is debt accumulated on steroids, or what Depros Mchena used to call debt alcoholism, is going to result in very poor MDC, very poor ZANU-PF, very poor civil society, and very poor private sector folk. So responsible stewardship is not a question of partisan alignment. Responsible stewardship is the new common sense that says Zimbabweans don't have another spare country. We have only one country, and there's no spare economy, we have only one economy. And this is what we must be conversing about. So clearly, comrades and friends, this Constitution of Zimbabwe contains almost everything we need to sustainably manage our debt. So do the requisite pieces of legislation. We have a public financial management structure and system and mechanism. We have reasonably good technocrats, but we're in debt distress. Laws don't cure a rot at the core of humanity. Laws don't cure the rot at the core of power or the failure of human essence. Technical competencies around what the law should say are no panacea to the failure of citizenship and responsible and accountable leadership. I wish to suggest to you that a debt crisis is essentially not about fixing laws and loopholes, although that is a technically important process. It is about fixing the heads and the minds of leadership and citizens to realize that when you bleed your own economy, when you bleed your own parastatals through primitive accumulation, you are bleeding the future, not just of the poor, but the future of the aspirant rich. Look, my friends, not only is our state in debt distress, our businesses are in debt distress. Did you last check how many businesses are failing to repay their loans? How many can't pay their mortgages? How many can't pay suppliers on time? How many have to downsize? Did you last check how many households are in debt distress? How many people are failing to send their kids to school? How many are failing to pay for health care? How many are failing to meet basic survival needs? The very right to a livelihood is threatened when we don't deal with the problem at the core. Responsible stewardship is necessary because we save our private sector and we save our homes. Household incomes and savings will not increase in an economy that's constantly getting into hyper debt and using all sorts of instruments to try and conceal and cover up profligacy. Fundamental problem, I will come to it. We are living way beyond our means. It was good to be chefs in the 80s when money was endless. We learned habits of leadership and chefdom. Big motorcades, big cars, big trips, big delegations, big per diems. But we no longer have the resources. It is sad because we're going to try this after we've tried many other things. I think my brother walked with me here. When we've tried many other things, oh, let me help you, because you won't know where I am. When we've tried many other things, what else have we tried? We have tried all sorts of things. Look, if debt was a new thing now, we would understand. So elsewhere on the slides, because I have limited time, let me say this. The hidden reality of the accumulation of our debt is over 60% of it has been accumulated to sustain the infrastructure of repression. The liberation war under Rhodesia, the Gugurahundi adventure in the 80s, Hondoye Minda. And there was nothing wrong with land reform. Understand me right. It is certain individuals who use the guise of agrarian reform and the process of indigenization to accumulate at a personal level. Right? We gave loans under the agriculture input scheme. We gave loans under new indigenization this. Many wealthy people in this city that drive very expensive cars never paid for the tractors, never paid for the combine harvesters, never paid for the equipment that they got. The intention was that you would stimulate a black entrepreneurial class that would help stimulate the economy. Now, privatization did not result in the stimulus that you thought would come from the economy for growth. It resulted in more primitive accumulation. It resulted in an attitude of impunity when it comes to economic benefit, where those who are wealthy and politically connected can get freebies from the state, and then the Reserve Bank will expect the taxpayer to pay. No, it's not an innocent thing, this debt assumption. The debt assumption is an assault on the very logic and decency of this country and its intention to go forward. If the president of this country is serious, he must revisit that debt assumption issue and make sure every single one of us who got a tractor, who got combine harvesters, who can pay back, should pay back. Responsible stewardship is not mollycoddling political allies and then expecting the rest of the citizenry, irrespective of political affiliation, to pay. So the genesis of the debt problem is linked to the infrastructure of repression. The rest of the debt structure is linked to two things: bona fide attempts to recover the economy, and number two, misguided policy attempts to get out of a political crisis. I do not wish us to paper over this matter. The issue of the restrictive measures under Zidera is an important conversational point because it placed certain restrictions with respect to debt rescheduling and new debt within the international community. So whether you want to call Zidera sanctions, restrictive measures, or whatever, it is important, but it is not the most important factor. If you read the preamble to Zidera, by the time Zidera was passed, we already were failing to pay back IMF and World Bank. In fact, those of you who know, our currency collapsed 3 years before Zidera was passed, right? Why? We went into a war in the Congo. It is the fourth war. that I did not discuss. We went to a war in the Congo, where Simba Makoni tells us we're spending in the 2001 budget statement, approved by Parliament, we're spending between $1 million and $3 million a day. We've never recovered from Congo, and nobody's talking about how we recover. Responsible stewardship also means that in our international economic relations, in our international political relations, we do not mortgage the future of this country without the consent of the governed. We do not do so without total accountability and transparency. So I wish to suggest to you that our problem is not purely a governance problem. Our problem is the lack of appreciation of the full impact of things done for political expedience or things done for short-term economic recovery. The wholesale impact in the plunge of our nation needs to be appreciated. In fact, Mkoma Nigel, everywhere where we tried to privatize, it resulted in a disaster for two reasons. Privatization without the ethical, the moral, the ideological, and the structural conditions that ensure that it is both accountable, transparent, and has a social policy linkage becomes purely transfer of inefficiencies from the state to the private hands. And I'll tell you what happened. For seed companies, for example, we privatized seed companies. There was an accumulation of knowledge, which were intellectual property rights, accumulated by farmers. We gave them over to and people who were buying. How can a country give over its entire intellectual property rights accumulated since over 100 years? So it seems to me there is a fundamental issue about not just the framework of privatization, but the logic of privatization. When we tried corporatization or commercialization, which was not privatization, what we did was even worse. On every parastatal board, and I challenge every MP here, whether you're ZANU or MDC, and this coup, the post-coup, whether it was a coup, which is a no coup, whatever you prefer to call it, in this moment, what we learned is how ministers were appointing boyfriends, girlfriends, relatives, village folk onto boards. So in essence, there is an ethical hole in the heart of our drive to recover our economy. Cronyism cannot deal with the debt issue. Much of the private debt we are accumulating, if it is not to keep politics running, it is to keep our cronies fat. The question of conflict of interest, and I want to address you as my brothers, members of parliament. Some of you are businessmen. Some of you are beneficiaries. You sit in parliament to pass laws on grain input schemes, on whatever schemes, and you don't declare conflict of interest. Although you are going to benefit, your family is going to benefit. So how is it that the beneficiaries sit in judgment? You cannot insist on ethics on anything else if ethics don't start with us, those of us in civil society and elsewhere. Now, the donors have not helped this problem. Each time there's a problem, they throw money. Each time there's a problem, they throw money. Each time and it seems like they believe in Zimbabwe and Zimbabwe's prospects for reform. My friends, our problem is not money. Our problem is leadership. Our problem is ethics. Our problem is responsibility. We don't have debt. Listen, every developing country and developed country borrows in order to stimulate growth. So the issue is not borrowing. Borrowing is not the problem, right? But if you borrow where there's no framework of accountability. Now, my brothers, sitting in parliament, and I asked Honorable Mliswa, he'll tell you I asked him, I said, what do you know about Zimbabwe's geosurvey data? If you have no geosurvey data, you can't sit and be asking me about the deposits of diamonds and of gold. You don't know. The price of the contracting was done without prior knowledge of the value of the deposits and how long they will last. We are spending more money on presidential and ministerial trips than we're spending beefing up our national statistical competencies. our ability to investigate how wealthy or poor we are in terms of natural resources. So the investors are the ones coming to tell us, you have chrome, you have deposits of X amount. I mean, this is so rare. It's like going to your father-in-law and calling your own Rohora price. That your daughter is worth this amount, so this is my Rohora. Or going to your father-in-law and calling your own Rohora price, because these days, you know, you can Rohora either way. There are many men that can't afford, so we have democratized the institution of Rohora. My sense, colleagues, is very simple. Ignorance does not construct accountability, no matter how rigorous the ritual of questioning. If you don't know, if you don't have data about the structure, the nature, and the extent, you cannot question and hold accountable. I thought I would have the same time as Titus, but I realized that since I'm older, so let me be quicker. I thought I had the same time, right? So there are many things that have been proposed about how to deal with the report itself deals with the issue of collusive power and oversight. So I'm suggesting in my last point that oversight, you can be an undertaker just to pronounce that the dead is dead. You know, at law, they say killing a live person, right? I don't know why lawyers don't realize that if you are dead, you can't be killed, right? Or you can be a marriage officer. The marriage officer does not determine love. The marriage officer simply pronounces. And there's very little in the affair. The oversight role of parliament becomes a joke if you do not have the power to stop. In the last 38 years, I don't recall once when parliament actually stopped a big deal by government on account of opacity, that it was opaque, it was not transparent. I challenge anyone to prove. I've had the noises. It's noise with no consequence. Right? And I mean no insults. I'm just saying, since it's a dialogue, right? It's Chatham House rules, right? And civil society, I think Cyrus has already, my brother has already given a critique of civil society, Titus. The next, discretion, executive authority, and due diligence. The president or the executive authority of the state can contract. The Constitution says so. But I have not seen Parliament going through due diligence reports before the trips to China, to Kuwait. In fact, Parliament is as shocked as everybody else. They are waiting for the deals to be signed, and then they come and have a discussion after the fact, when the deals cannot be annulled. Some of our debt, you officials from the Ministry of Finance, how much of our debt came through as a result of stabilization clauses that we signed in contracts that we entered into before 2014? That said, if X factors are not guaranteed, then the investor would not assume responsibility. So it's not just dealing with the contract, it's dealing with the exercise of discretion. It must be done accountably, it must be done reasonably, it must be done transparently. And it seems to me that this is not a problem of one political party. When we're at the GNU, this thing of quick deals from private lenders, from so and so, was also happening. So this is not trading factors. It may be necessary, but then the rules must be amended to indicate under what conditions does that discretion get, do we waive rules? Personalization and privatization I talked about, cabinet ministers and MPs who are in business, and likely direct or indirect business benefit. Instrumentalization of the state to clean up the mess, I talked about the RBZ. Then grand corruption and theft. I think this, MPs, this is the test of whether you are genuine. This one, the last one. Everyone has just gone quiet on Wange. I mean, there were whistleblowers until the whistleblower may be blown out of the water, right? The idea of untouchables when it comes to critical pillage of state assets or deals that are murky based on significant conflict of interest is important. I think we must deal with it. So because I've been told What is the solution? I mean, you can identify a problem. I think that what you are doing today is part of the solution. It's a multi-stakeholder approach, right? Civil society doesn't know 3/4 of the things that happen when we assume public debt. How do I know this? Joy, you may remember, a few years ago, Brian from Cape Town, the lawyer who was doing the Cape asbestos case, myself and the late Mandevu and Patrick, we ran a training for civil society folk in Nairobi, the leadership. It was on, they kept on saying IMF and World Bank conditionalities. So on the first day, we gave them the agreement that Brazil had signed and the Nigerian one. And we asked them to find conditionalities. None of them, after half a day, had been able to find conditionalities. But all of them were talking about conditionalities in IMF and World Bank bit. The truth of the matter is, we can't sloganeer anymore. We can't sloganize anymore. We have to get into the data. We have to get into the stats. We have to get into understanding fully the concept. So it's a multi-stakeholder. And Parliament, you can't rely anymore on newspaper reports, on some clever guy coming to talk to you. You have to read this for yourself. So the first one, it's a multi-stakeholder set of solutions. And I've placed Zidera there. I have insisted for years, and my brother knows my view on this, that Zidera must be on the table. This is not to make ZANU-PF feel good. This is simply because it is a bad law that seeks to regulate the affairs in another sovereign from the precinct of a domestic, right? It is a bad law. It was bad when it was done for Cuba. It is bad when it was done for Iran. Have we done things that merit other people to frown on us? Yes, but it doesn't make Zidera good, okay? Number two, a knowledge-based economy, a knowledge-based approach to debt. Knowledge-based. And knowledge is not just being told. Knowledge is the capacity to investigate independently. And fiscal discipline, I think other people have talked about it, and accountability. This zero corruption or zero tolerance for corruption must be real. The next one, a live debt sustainability framework with an active role for citizens and parliament. I'm looking for more robust talk. Not regurgitation of parliamentary rules, or not regurgitation of the civil society slogans. And much more. Let's take, just in the period of the Mnangagwa government, the 15 deals, big deals announced. Let's all walk through them and say, this is good for the country, this is great for the country. I was told Byte Bridge was going to be rebuilt. I didn't see a public tender floated. I didn't see anything. I didn't see even a model of how it would be built. How is this? This is arbitrary. I'm not just happy that you are rebuilding. I want to know who's getting the contract, on what basis. How does it benefit the youth of Zimbabwe in terms of employment? How does it benefit women? How does it benefit the vendors and the highest volume of traffic? Who's been consulted? So I have no problem with base being rebuilt. I am happy that it should be. Make it transparent. The next one, open, responsible, accountable government. Access to information and data. The biggest problem in Zimbabwe is access to information. We're still using an old state security paradigm where everything is a secret. I'm sorry, that's how Mugabe ran us. And now the people who were with Mugabe, whether they were eating or they were hungry at the table, are now saying IMF, which does not mean International Monetary Fund. IMF means it's Mugabe's fault. Right? You ask them, why was this done? But you were there. But when we have access to information, proper access to information, and we have data that's reliable, our statistical offices are well equipped, well personed, then we're able to investigate. The next one, leadership, commitment, and political will. I had a lot of things that I wanted to say. Let me conclude so that Joy is not unhappy with me. Leadership, commitment, and political will means that leadership must commit to change habits of old. Habits regarding power. Remember where I stated about stewardship. Habits regarding how power is exercised. Habits regarding how accountability is done. Habits regarding how those who are your subordinates, who are guilty of corruption or malpractice, are held to account. I mean, these days in government and before in government, if you are accused of corruption in one department, you are transferred elsewhere or to the party, right? Nobody investigates, nobody takes this anti-corruption. But if you were an opponent, you were prosecuted. This habit where there's democracy for our friends and accountability for everybody else doesn't work. There must be a change in all our political parties, in all our civic entities. So it seems to me that there are two key pillars. I know that Zimcod put many. Number one, data, information, and institutions. Our institutions have been so weakened. In fact, they do their bidding according to body language. I liked the official from the Ministry of Finance. They said, ask me technical things, all other things, write it for the minister. I'll tell you what that means. I don't want to run foul of politicians who are not members of the public administration because they have control over what I do. This body language that technicians are circumspect in what they can say or can't say, can do, because the political class, who are not experts, can determine that what you have said, though true, is not politically beneficial, then you can be fired, is the essence of our crisis. The last thing, citizens, private sector, FBOs, labor, vendors, know-how and partnerships. It is a partnership and we need to know how to do these things. So there are two senses of know-how. Know-how is the technical expertise. Partnership is the extended capacity. In real life, you can borrow, beg, steal, or buy capacity, right? If as parliamentarians you don't have the capacity, you have civil society and the private sector. Strengthen how you engage and extend the mechanism. If as private sector you don't have the capacity to understand broader social policy, get it from civil society. If from civil society you don't understand fully how private sector thinks, have a partnership. This infusing of ideas across is important. I will end by saying, Joy, any economic logic that does not speak to the political logic is mere fantasy. Any political logic that makes no economic sense is mere witchcraft. Right? Right? And finally, any political and economic logic that does not answer to social needs is mere elite fraud. And I want you to understand that the problem of debt is elite fraud. How elites can transfer their accumulation into the responsibility of the taxpayer. And yet when it is benefit, the responsibility is not transferred to the taxpayer. Ngoma Nigel raised the issue of the pensioners. Many of the people who lost their pensions lost it when we dollarized, lost again now. There was compensation to everyone else through free tractors, free seed, free. That nobody called the pensioners to NASA to say, we were stealing your money to keep our lavish lifestyles going. Can we compensate you for the patience of allowing us to chop your money? Right. I would like to end by saying, because this is my last ending, right? That debt is about power. Power that is ceded to outsiders, power that is abused, power that is misused, or power that is misappreciated. Dealing with the debt crisis starts with dealing with how society views power, leadership, institutions, and ideas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. Yeah, it's hard to stop speakers like the speakers that are speaking here. But I'm sure there is a huge benefit in also engaging deeply, isn't it? So years back, so many years back when Zimcod started and we were activists there, we could get away with sloganeering. Me and Hopewell. You know what we simply said? We simply said, don't owe, won't pay. We don't owe anyone, we will not pay. Full stop. And we had t-shirts that were written, don't owe, won't pay. But it made sense at that point because it was also about building a critical mass, isn't it? It's like the National Constitutional Assembly, when before it was turned into a political party. The message was very simple. New people-driven constitution. We are ready to die for a new people-driven constitution, full stop. What that meant, you would populate that yourself. Are you ready there? So we thought before Judith comes in, let's just have a 90 seconds breather. There is a short video that colleagues from Zimcode just want to show us as Judith prepares. And colleagues, please bear with us on time. I know we are not doing well on time. Please bear with us. We'll eat a little bit into lunch and then we will go a little bit beyond 3:30. Please do not also leave after lunch.
The situation in our country has reached another level. We have a national debt crisis in this country. But mukandivotera nopedza zvikwereti zvese in 14 days.
Plus one over. How is he going to clear $17.690 billion debt in 14 days?
Pakatoyipa boys. According to the 2019 National Budget Statement, Zimbabwe's public and publicly guaranteed debt stood at $17.282 billion. Apa zvainzi chakwira kusvika 18 billion muna December 2018. Ameno kuti mazuva ano zvakamira sei?
Saka zvinoreva kuti the debt to GDP ratio constitutes over 70% of the country's GDP. After rebasing the economy from 18 billion to 25 billion economy, it is therefore debatable to agree that the current debt is sustainable because it once stood at 137% of the GDP before rebasing the economy.
Gang. Muruguanza vet. Danza mchingoti public. Shinoya kuti. Munu wese munyika. Uneducated. I've never borrowed money from anyone.
Konai sister, is it true kuti munhu wese munyika muno uneducated?
Technically, it is true. Given that our population is roughly kuma 14 million, each Zimbabwean owes about $1,311. Even wana zvara nasi atoneducated.
Thank you. Judith, over to you. Please, let's give Judith Kaulem a round of applause. So Judith, the same rules apply with equal violation as the other two speakers.
What does that mean?
It means you can also violate in the same manner.
Okay, thank you. That's how I had outlined my presentation, and I won't go much into that. In there, I threw in issues of sustainable development goals, which is my passion, but I think it's relevant. I think from the discussions that we are having, we are all agreed that debt is a development challenge to Zimbabwe. It is not only an issue that sits out there, but it's a development challenge. It's a development challenge how? Because it touches on our well-being as people. When governments enter into debt, or when they do negotiate and get debt relief, there's an assumption, or there's a belief, a hope that the resources that government is getting, they are going to be channeled into improving access to and quality of health, education, water, sanitation, those areas where you and I are, where the ordinary person benefits from. There's that assumption. But we need to be able to view Zimbabwe's debt situation, debt challenge, from the prism of human and social needs. We are talking of the huge figures that the country owes. We are talking of the huge figures that the country pays in terms of servicing the debts. When we juxtapose that with the lived experiences on the ground, what do we see as we are having this discussion? This is what we see. A country that is characterized by a triple crisis: a crisis of poverty, a crisis of inequality, a crisis of unemployment. There's generalized poverty, which is estimated over 80%, unemployment which is estimated over 90%, and we know that of that 90%, the majority are the youths, who are the generation that we are building towards. And we also know that even of that 90% that are considered, of the 10% that is considered employed, they are in the informal sector. And we know the precariousness within that sector. We are talking of a country right now which is sitting at number 156 out of 189 countries globally in terms of the Human Development Ranking. But that is a country that has that huge debt that we are talking about. We are talking of high income inequality. Those that have, those that do not have, that gap on a daily basis is widening. That is what is characterizing the country. We are also talking of low quality human capital. And here, for example, if we were to take, and it's not meant to be an insult, but just trying to be objective, if we were to take graduates that come out of our institutions of higher learning now and compare them with graduates that passed through the same institutions 20 years back, what do we see? What do we observe? The quality has gone down. Part of it is because the same institutions are no longer as equally supported, as equally funded as they were those 20 years ago. We are talking of a country that is experiencing high out-migration. We have invested a lot in human development. We see the multiplicity of higher institutions, universities that are developing, but there is a lot of brain drain. The country is investing for other nation states to benefit. We are scattered all over the globe because of that out-migration. The World Health Organization in 2018 highlighted that the life expectancy for males in Zimbabwe stood at 59.6 years. The life expectancy for females at 63.1%, making the average maybe 60, 61, something there. So if you are living beyond that, because our life expectancy has really gone down. With all the challenges that we see, that we experience, what you see generally on people's faces is a sense of helplessness, a sense of giving up. That's why for some, when they give up, we see that out-migration. People leave for what they could see as greener pastures. Sometimes they are not even greener. There is a lot of human suffering that they experience there. So to some extent, this scenario, this reality that we are in, to some extent, is also a contribution of the direct and indirect impacts of the debt burden that the country has at the moment. Because in the context of high-level indebtedness and high debt servicing obligations, the government is forced to reduce the resources that it would have diverted towards those social sectors where the majority of the population would benefit from. And we see that the servicing of the debt, the heavy debt due, it may directly divert the budgetary resources that we might get from our natural resources, that we might get from the taxes, whether it's 2% and whatever, and that then curtails the economic growth. And we know that economic growth is a determinant of poverty. So such a situation would then force government to divert those resources from the budget that would have benefited. And we have also observed in many cases, the report that SIMCOD has done has also even shown where government has failed to repay. The Minister of Finance has also even alluded to that. And that has implications on attracting new flows of external resources. And when that does not happen, it then directly affects those sectors where people would have benefited and people's basic needs are not met. Sectors like education, sectors like health, water and sanitation, infrastructure, they are then affected because there are no flows that are coming in to boost those sectors. And the high indebtedness can indirectly affect poverty when it creates uncertainties. When investors are not sure of the security of their investment, when private sector investment cannot contribute towards employment creation, if people are uncertain, then they cannot put their money into a hole which they don't know how deep it is, or where there are no guarantees of them getting the money. So you find that the financial markets, the donors, they will perceive the country as insecure. We have heard those statements. And some of those emanated from the inconsistencies in policies that government has put through. A lot of debate was around the indigenization policy. You hear one thing today, you hear another tomorrow from policymakers who are meant to inform. So that creates uncertainty, that creates a lack of confidence with the investors. And what it then does is where investors would have come in and boosted our industries and opened companies, there are then company closures. And when companies close, we know what happens. We have experienced retrenchments from ASAP, but it has been an ongoing thing at various levels or magnitude. But those job losses now they create that vicious cycle because people have no source of income that comes to them. Or the situation that we have in Zimbabwe now, where we have a whole range of people who are considered as the working poor. If you and I are going to give our labor to an entity, and at the end of the month we don't get in remuneration a wage that is above 500, and that's 500 US. If you don't get that, then you are a working poor because you are living below the poverty datum line. You have no living income that comes out of it. And so living below that poverty datum line make it then means as a head of household, as the age earner in the family, you cannot meet the basic needs of your household. It then creates a vicious cycle. Children cannot go to school. Expecting mothers cannot go to a hospital and deliver. The roads are not looked after. So the vicious cycle of poverty will be then in perpetuity. We know, or we could ask, how many opportunities that the government could have entered into that it lost because of the uncertainties that are created by the policy inconsistencies that I've talked about. But we know that as we discuss debt and its management, it cannot be discussed in isolation. The country has to take a very holistic approach. We have talked about the indigenization policy. It might have a direct impact on investors. But how do policies that government puts in tourism affect investment? How do policies that government puts in our security sector affect investment? So we can't be discussing debt in isolation of other sectors. We really need to take a holistic approach towards that. We are aware that debt is negatively and significantly related to economic growth, and servicing of debt has implications as well on labor productivity, and that can adversely affect economic growth. We don't want to throw the baby with the bathwater, because external debt might add value to a country's economic growth if it